The world is facing a serious problem. Many countries are drowning in debt. This isn't just a minor inconvenience, it's a full-blown crisis. And guess what? China is playing a major role. They've been lending money left and right, especially to developing nations. Now, these countries are struggling to repay these loans. This situation is causing huge economic problems all over the place. Think of it like this. Imagine borrowing money from a friend to start a business. But your business idea is terrible and you end up losing all the money. Now you're stuck with a huge debt you can't repay. That's what's happening to many countries right now. They borrowed heavily from China, hoping for economic growth, but things didn't go as planned. Now they're stuck in a financial mess. This problem is bigger than just a few countries. It's a global issue with serious consequences. We've seen what happens when countries can't repay their debts. Their economies crumble, people suffer, and political instability runs rampant. This is not a joke, people. This is the real deal. And the worst part? China is using this debt to its advantage. They're using it as leverage to gain influence and control over these struggling nations. This tactic is called debt trap diplomacy. It's a shady game, and China is playing it like a pro. Sri Lanka is a cautionary tale of what happens when a country falls into the debt trap. This beautiful island nation was once a shining example of economic progress. But then came the Chinese loans. Sri Lanka borrowed billions of dollars from China to fund ambitious infrastructure projects. Sounds familiar? These projects looked good on paper, but were poorly planned and riddled with corruption. Sri Lanka's government kept borrowing more and more money, even though it was clear they couldn't afford it. They were like that friend who keeps borrowing money from you, promising to pay you back next time, but next time never comes. Eventually, the chickens came home to roost. Sri Lanka's economy collapsed. They couldn't even afford to import basic necessities like food and fuel. People were struggling to survive. Protests erupted across the country, demanding the government's resignation. Sri Lanka became a textbook example of how not to manage your finances. The situation was so dire that Sri Lanka had to hand over control of a strategically important port to China. Why? Because they couldn't repay their debt. This move raised serious concerns about China's intentions. Was this just a case of a lender calling in its debts, or was it something more sinister? Sri Lanka's story isn't unique. Other countries are facing similar challenges. Take Pakistan, for example. This South Asian nation is blessed with abundant natural resources, but years of poor governance, corruption, and reckless borrowing have taken their toll. Pakistan is now drowning in debt, much of it owed to China. They're stuck in a vicious cycle of borrowing more money to repay old debts. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It just doesn't work. South Africa is another country teetering on the brink. They've got it all: minerals, tourism, a diverse economy, but they've also got massive debt and a government struggling to get its act together. South Africa, like Pakistan, has borrowed heavily from China to fund infrastructure projects, and like Pakistan, they're finding it tough to repay these loans. The problem with these loans is that they often come with strings attached. China isn't just lending money out of the goodness of its heart, they're looking for something in return: influence, access to resources, and strategic advantages. So, how do we solve this global debt crisis? It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but one thing's for sure: we need better governance. Countries need to get their financial houses in order. That means tackling corruption, investing in education and healthcare, and creating a business-friendly environment. We also need more transparency in lending practices. China needs to come clean about its loan terms and conditions. No more shady deals behind closed doors. International organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund also have a role to play. They need to provide debt relief to struggling nations and help them get back on their feet. But ultimately, it's up to each individual country to take responsibility for its own finances. They need to stop relying on unsustainable loans and start making smart investments that benefit their people. Remember, folks, there's no such thing as a free lunch, especially when it comes to borrowing money from China.